So one way to prevent exposure to soil contaminants is to wash your hands and wash your produce. By washing both, you're eliminating the dirt from that you might ingest by eating either your produce or getting it on your hands.
It's definitely a good idea to leave those garden shoes at the door. Have a separate pair of shoes that you wear in your house. If you get that contaminated dust in the house, you're going to be breathing it in, and that's not going to be good for you.
So one of the steps you can take to actually reduce exposure if you do think that you have soil contaminants in your garden is to wear gloves when you're every time that you're working in the soil. You can also put a layer of mulch down, especially in garden pathways. A thick layer of mulch is a great way of reducing exposure to soil contaminants. One of the things you can do to reduce your exposure as well is to test your soil quite frequently for pH. If you have a neutral soil, it actually helps to reduce the exposure that you're going to have, because plants will not uptake as many contaminants when the soil is at a neutral level as opposed to an acidic state. So that's one of the things you can do, and it also is great for your plants to make sure that you have a good pH balance for your soil. One of the things that you can do if you suspect that there are contaminants in your garden that's most effective actually is to build raised beds and to put a layer of weed cloth or other preventative materials below those raised beds. And in the garden pathways as well, so that you are not having any exposure to the original soil in the garden. So if you are working in your garden with the original soil, one of the ways that you can reduce your chances of being exposed to contaminants is actually to incorporate quite a bit of compost into the soil. That organic matter will actually bind up certain contaminants and keep you from being exposed.
The compost is the most important thing in the garden, because the compost adds nutrients to the soil and also help to grow healthy food. This is very important. So what I do in the compost is do our own compost. To put, for example, dry leaves, it is very good. And then you can put the scraps from the kitchen or from your own garden.
So there are a number of ways that you can design and manage your garden in ways that help reduce exposure to soil contaminants as well. One of those is actually to be sure that you're not introducing materials into the garden that may contain contaminants. And that includes treated wood or certain plastics that may leach chemicals out into the soil. So don't use those for raised beds or other uses.
I use, for example, a spray from the garlic and hot pepper and soap. And I make a solution with this and I spray in this. Or I put diatomaceae earth, is the bones, powder, and I use that.
Also, you should be concerned about stormwater runoff, especially if you're near a parking lot or a roadway. So there's ways that you can create barriers and ditches so that the stormwater will run into the soil above the garden and not into the garden. Another thing you can do is actually to create hedges or tree barriers, so leafy barriers between you and roadways that prevent air contaminants coming in and settling into your garden and depositing chemical contaminants in that way. So one thing you can do is, if you do suspect that there's areas of your yard that have chemical contaminants, is to plant ornamentals and to mulch heavily. This will reduce your exposure to chemical contaminants. And plant your vegetables someplace else where you think the soil is cleaner.